Okay, this is Don Campbell from 488 Telstar Avenue, Sudbury, Ontario, Moonglow subdivision. I was a welder for 25 years at Inco, and the last 10 years before I took my pension in '85 I was a foreman, supervisor, teacher, and finally a head foreman for the Coppercliff welding shop with 72 people under me. I'm going to relate a few stories and things that have personally happened to me over the years, especially in 1967, when I was already on CHNO and CKS over the radio of incidents that happened around our district. Was in the Sudbury Star the following day. We were at work this day on day shift, and I was tacking jobs in the plate shop when one of the welders happened to be standing out near the back door having a smoke and noticed this beautiful silver disc. It apparently was about 5-6 miles high over the tracks where we dump our slag, and drew everybody's attention. Hey guys, come on out and see this beautiful silver looking thing. And we're all pointing up and at it, and even then some people said, gee, I wonder, is it a floating balloon or anything? One of the welders was smart enough to tack a little stick on the back door, which is permanently held open for trains going in and out bringing plates. He nailed a stick as a gun sight and aimed it over as you would a gun barrel, and aimed it over the edge of the door right at this silver balloon, or what we thought may be a silver balloon. This was at 10 o'clock in the morning. People were talking about it. Elwood Tresize, who was the foreman in the shop at that time, phoned in the station, told them about this, and they said, yes, we've got many calls about it. People in Sudbury were looking up. We were looking up. This went on till approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But before 2 o'clock, I was so excited. Owning a telescope at home, I decided to get sick early and headed for my home. By the time I got home and looked up in the direction that the balloon should have been, it was no longer there. Not for 1 minute did I think it was a balloon. It was a beautiful silver disc shining in the sun. It hadn't moved in the 4-hour period, so we knew darn well that a balloon would slowly drift, but this thing had stayed there. It was gone. So the next day I related this to my fellow welders and plate workers out there, and they said, oh yeah, it was there, and it just zoomed away and it was gone in a matter of 2 seconds, a couple of blinks of the eye, and it was gone. The follow-up in the Sudbury Star the following day, many phone calls to stations and the Sudbury Star. Turns out that the Air Force says all this was a weather balloon taking up information of ionosphere and stratosphere conditions, and that nothing to worry about, it's not a UFO, and that it just drifted away on its own. And when questioned, they said, well, how come it stayed in the same place for 4 hours over Coppercliff? They said it was a weather inversion, and it was held there by a pocket of air that was not moving. And then some people said, well, how come it could fly away all of a sudden? They had no answer for that. There was no more follow-up the following day in the paper. Just the one article saying it was a weather balloon and it drifted away on its own. And many people said it didn't drift away, it just flew away at an incredible speed, disappeared. And that was one of the incidents in 67 going into the summer of 67. One of the reasons I got interested in UFO, or I should say UFOs, was in 1966. I was at my residence at 132 Ethelbert Street, and happened to come home this night from 4 to 12, as I did many times in the evening, and liked sitting out on the porch, and happened to look out, and it was in a westerly direction. I was looking out this particular night, and I seen what I thought was a very bright star in the sky, and I thought I was confusing it with Venus, but Venus shouldn't have been in the west at that time. It should have been more over, northeasterly at that particular time of year. So I remember going in and getting my 8x35 binoculars and looking at it and thinking, gee, that's strange. Green, red, green, red, green, red. So I called my wife out and I says, take a look at this over here. And I can still remember pointing up, getting binoculars, having a hard time to focus in right where I was pointing. She says, oh yeah, she says, that plane, it's got a green and red light on and it's changing. I says, yeah, but it's sitting there like a helicopter. And I said, that's very strange. I listened and listened, no sound. This really got me interested. And then it seemed to come down with a very unusual movement out of the sky. Can't describe it on a tape, but I'm looking at it, and all of a sudden it just seemed to come down out of the sky, and it was about 10 miles closer to my eyes. Just a quick drop. And this is what caught my interest. I thought, a plane doesn't move like that. It comes, like a long directional, and it was there, and it stopped. When I focused in on it, and I said, boy, oh boy, now I know that's no plane. Because here was this red light, green light flashing from end to end, like a traditional plane would, coming in for landing, but there it was sitting like a helicopter, absolutely no sound. And then all of a sudden, the red light went out, the green light went out, and just a bright glow, almost looked like a halogen, white fluorescent light, and it just sped right off, straight up into the sky, at an angle, about a 45-degree angle, and disappeared, all within 3-4 seconds from the time the red and green went out. And I said, that does it. I have just witnessed my first phenomenon in the sky, a UFO, and my heart was pounding, and I was all excited. And this was getting later in that year, and I started watching the skies more. I didn't get too excited that year because I didn't really see that much more in that particular year. I think one other time, which it might have been or might have not been, too far of a distance. One of the good stories I like to always tell is in August of 67, on 4 to 12, I was a 3-shift welder, and 4 to 12 was our favorite shift for watching, and it was 10:20, 10:30, and I was in the welding shop this night, and I was welding, and we have an interplant phone which is 515. The plate shop was 505, and my friend Jimmy Tomasini was ringing the phone off the wall. I guess there was 5 or 6 of us back at the plate shop. He was in the welding shop. No, I was in the welding shop. He was in the plate shop, and he said, Don, he said, did you look out the front and see this UFO? And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, it did a double circle around the stack. He said, I'm sure it's a UFO. A plane would never come in the grounds. It would be against the law. And he says, you better run to the front door. Just leave the phone off the hook and see if you can see it. I run to the front door, which was a couple of 100 feet, and I looked over toward the dry, just in time to see this thing hovering over near the dry. So I run back to the phone and I said, Jimmy, I'm going to run right over to the plate shop right now, where you are. And he said, oh, good. He says, it's definitely a UFO because I've lost track of it. And where he was in the plate shop, he could no longer see it from where I could see it out the back door. So I run across the road, put my helmet and everything down, my gear, got over to the plate shop where there was at least 8 welders. He was one of them that was working overtime that night, and plus our own gang of 10 welders, and plus 8 plate workers because some converter hoods and some other things had collapsed, the number 1 and 2 converter, and they had emergency jobs rebuilding to get these converters back into operation. So this is quite all interesting. So we all run out the back. Everybody's all excited. Hey, come on, welders, Maniego and Dubois and Kelly and everybody that was in there, we're calling them all, come on to the back door and come and see what's over the dry. So we angle our look out and we go out in the back tracks and we're all out the back door. Some guys are smoking, some aren't. And we're all looking, and it's just hovering there over the dry. And this got us quite excited. Then it started to approach our shop. So we were waiting, and it's coming down. It's not, it's barely moving, like not even 30 miles an hour, maybe 10, 15, just coming down. We say, my God, this thing is so low. We think it's going to get caught in the hydro lines, because we got all these electric poles up for the electric trains. And we think, and we say, well, it isn't that low. It must be 10 feet. It must be missing the post by 10 feet. Well, you wouldn't have an airplane flying over darkness at 10, 15 feet over hydro poles with high current line. It's coming, and it's off to our left, and it's a gorgeous sight. Here's a little red light on the front, and a green light, and the red light is pulsating, the green light is on steady. We can't tell the back from the front of this craft, because we can see it's an oval shape. We're not directly underneath it, but we're almost at an angle. So we watch it as it goes by. Now it's facing directly east as it passes our eyesight from the back door, and the CIL building is about 800, 900 feet past the plate shop. We glance over straight east. We say, oh my God, it's going to bump right into the building. All of us, we're all watching this with great delight, and it eases right up, just beautiful in banks, just as if it's got its radar set for buildings and obtrusion. It just lifts automatically, just clears the CIL stainless steel stacks for vents. It just goes right over them at a beautiful angle, and then veers up. I personally did not see it do the double take around the stack. This was earlier in the evening. And I didn't see it go over the concentrator because we can't see the concentrator. The concentrator, apparently, when it went over it, there was about 15 witnesses out there that were out in the backyard scraping down old Denver cell parts and everything. We found this out the next day. They had witnessed it going over there. Number 3 power station is about 1,000 feet before number 1 dry, where I changed every day. And when it went over the power station, all the knives broke open, and these were the main feed lines from number 1 power station to the concentrator. The concentrator kicked out at 10:30 that night, causing a gigantic flood, all blacked out in that area, which we didn't know at that time had happened. So anyway, Sergeant Wayman, meanwhile, after seeing all this and the thing flying away at an amazing, just a blip light going up, 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 and then it became a star, and then it was gone. I'm on the phone phoning the 969, the radar, telling them just what's happened. And then they start asking questions. What condition is the sky? Or did you see this by yourself, sir? I said, oh no. I said, there's 18 or 20 of us here at least that were all watching it at the same time. We're all tradespeople. That impressed him. I couldn't be all drunk at work, in case that's what he was implying. Have you been drinking tonight? I'm a welder. My age is 30-some years old, blah, blah. I'm a first-class welder. Told him all this, and he said, okay. So he took down all the detail, and he said, you'll be hearing from us about that. Hung up. Meanwhile, Sergeant Wayman, he's passed away since then. He died about 9 years later than this date. He come running over all out of breath, and he said, hey, you guys, did you see? He says, I was standing at he's security, eh? He's standing at the front gate. He said, did you see that thing come over? He says, I was at the front gate of the dry. He says, just standing there and having a smoke. He said, big as life. He says, I never believed in these things. He said, a big circle thing, he says, and a big bottom. He says, what a fantastic sight, and not even a hum out of it, just like a ghost moving along. And he says, not only that, he says, but I seen it when it went over the transformer house, and he said, all these flashes as all the knives kicked out. He said, I seen that too. He said, they must be going to have trouble tonight someplace. He didn't know that it was connected to the concentrator. So we're all talking to Sergeant Wayman, and I said, I phoned the radar base. He was excited, we're excited. None of us did anything the rest of the night except sit down and talk about what we had just witnessed. And the radar base, of course, they got in touch with me the following day. They phoned me at home, knowing that I had made a few other reports from before this time and this same year. They knew who Don Campbell was. So, to make a long story short, the next day we found out there was about 15 witnesses at the concentrator. The people near the power station, you're not allowed to go in, except the 2 operators. They didn't see the knives actually opening up, but the 2 electricians on duty had to unlock the gates, go in there, and push 1 knife in at a time, and by walkie-talkies to the remote station, and say, okay, power's on number 1, power's on number 2. You don't push all the knives in too rapidly, because you can get a burnout, because all the power is in the on modes of the concentrator. They didn't have automatic kickoffs. So you had to put in phase 1, wait a minute, then phase 2, phase 3. So they were very careful. They'd watch their voltage come up, kick in the lines. I think there was 5 kick-in switches or 6 that had all kicked out. You just don't slam them all back in to get power, because you'd get a power surge and something would burn out. So each phase controls a certain part of the concentrator. I didn't know this at the time, but talking to electricians I found out. So they kicked them all back in. And again, there's the next day that the official reason, or the reason that the power went out in the logbook of the superintendent at that time, was logged in their book. Because they have to report this to New York. When they have a shutdown, it costs $20,000-$30,000 in lost production. It has to be noted in the logbook, the superintendent. He was not on duty that night, but when he came on duty the next day, he was a steady day man. He was told all the circumstances. So the official reason for the power outage at 10:30 that evening, for 15 minutes before they got everything kicked back in, and the loss of production, was an unidentified flying object over the Coppercliff complex, doing a double circle around the middle stack, then over the concentrator, and then over the dry, and then over the back of the plate shop with 18-20 witnesses, over the CIL building, disappearing in a northeasterly direction. And as told by Don Campbell, who had phoned the radar, and they confirmed that it sped away at 22,000 miles an hour from a cruising speed of 10-15 miles an hour in the yard, which was just poking, and then when it angled up and left, it just became a star. And then if you looked up, that's what you think it was, just a little white star. This is one of my favorite stories, because so many people looked at it, and the welders that used to kid me and say, there's UFO Don, the guy that goes out at night with different people and sees UFOs, and when they all seen it and spread it to all the other 50, 60, 70 welders, there was no more kidding around about UFO Don anymore, because there was 18, 20 people, all with eyes like me, looking up at an object with a red and green light and witnessing for their first time in their life a genuine UFO, not a Piper Cub or a Cessna flying 10, 15 feet over the company property at 10:30 at night and causing an outage of electrical power and everything, and documented by the superintendent. Everybody was excited. Then from then on, when I used to go out on my excursions, 2, 3, 4 people would want to come out with me. And I used to just sort of put most of them off except my favorite friend, who believed me right from the start, which was Jimmy Tomasini. He was my partner for going up the hills and going here and going there. You know, he was the one that was with me the majority of time when I was back at the Sudbury Drive-In Theatre, which, you know, doesn't exist anymore, but it fronts onto over a hill on Rinfret Street and LaSalle Boulevard facing the front, and Rinfret and all those streets at the back. We used to go up that highest point, back up there with telescope, binoculars, and all our equipment, and watch there every night, 1 o'clock till 3, 4 every morning, and then come home and go to bed. My wife threatened to divorce me more than once that year in 67 and also in 68. It's a good thing that they did start to taper off, because I had a disease, and that was watching UFOs, and I guess I never would have stopped. But had they started to trickle off to one every, 8 weeks, 7, 8 weeks, in 68, as the summer wore on, then we go out, and it was a lot of fruitless nights after I had many, many sightings in 67, and quite a few from May, June, July on in 68. And then as the year wore on, it became less and less, because we weren't, as they call it, a hotspot on the map anymore. They were looking at something else. They must have mapped and studied Sudbury. To my opinion, they were studying our nickel veins and our water routes and everything in this district, because for UFOs to come over every night, or almost every second night, June, July, August, September, right into October, and maybe probably all winter, but I wasn't one to put on a snowsuit and go stand out for 4 hours shivering in the cold, so I went out in the warm weather. But Sudbury was the spot, and according to the Air Force, yes, we are the hot spot. We're the place right now, the UFO flap. And I don't know what flap stands for yet. They said we're having a UFO flap. Before they had it in Florida, they had it in California, they had it in Australia. And when UFOs come almost on a nightly basis for day in, day out in one area, first it was Cape Real, then it was Worthington, Walden Township, over Sudbury, postal workers, we were even having them rode up in the Sudbury Star, Postal worker in Cape Real sees UFO. So-and-so at 6 in the morning believes he's seen a UFO. This was what was happening in Sudbury in 67, 68. I went out a bit in 69 and lost interest, never in my heart, but only because they weren't there anymore. Then I would read in UFO magazines and books, a few which were cancelled by the American government. There was the UFO Observer, which I think had 6 or 7 issues out, and I'd be waiting breathlessly for this issue on the newsstand, and it wasn't there, and it wasn't there. I only got 2 copies, I think. And then we heard that the American government said, we don't want this book out. They canceled it out. They told the people, quit printing it up. Too close to the truth of what was happening around. They said public panic, and the book got out 1 or 2 times. Got off. They got printed. I never seen the first copies. I only seen the last couple. And then you couldn't get them. They were only $1.25 at the time. They were taken off the newsstand. They were too close to, and it mentioned a lot of the famous names that are now famous with you. The people that are involved right up to this day. I mentioned Dr. So-and-so and this guy and that guy, and they were quite famous at the time. And then, of course, the government, I guess it was the American government, it was an American publication that had to come across the border. And I don't know if it's the Canadian government that said we won't allow this issue into Canada, or it just wasn't being printed anymore in the States. I don't know yet to this day. It was just cancelled out, not because they needed money, because it belonged to a bigger network of magazines. It was just one of their publications, but it disappeared, and I was very, very disappointed. I would have liked to keep seeing it. Another time when we were up where the Sudbury Drive-In Theatre used to be, there was a hilltop up there, and there was not houses built right in this, but there is now. And our 100,000 UHV, they call it hydro closet, the UHV or UHF, ultra high frequency line. It puts 100,000 volts through. It comes from the Neil and Garrison station on the Falconbridge Road. This particular night, we were just sitting up on this hill, had the scope set up and all our equipment sitting there, and lo and behold, this UFO came over, and it was so low, and we had our binoculars on it, we couldn't follow it with the telescope right away because it was going about 35, 40 miles an hour. And it came over by the flour mill section, and there's a pair of radar towers. Now, this is how low we realized it was. And these two radar towers are still sitting there today, up by the ski hill there. There's two towers with red lights. It flew directly in between those two towers, and it sat there for a good 5-10 minutes. Then it came through, where our big tunnel sewer is there now, where they drain all of the flour mill section that used to get flooded. They had built this big, huge 8-foot line through the swamp area to drain. In this particular year, that was one of their big conquests in Sudbury, was draining this water. And we were looking down toward that area, and also the Fruit Mine area, and this one particular UFO would fly over this area, would stop over houses, and a pencil beam of light, flaring out to a wide light at the bottom, would light up a half a block to a block at one time. Through our binoculars, we could read the license plates from 2-3 miles back with 8-power binoculars. It was such a bright beam light that when it first came on, it would hurt our eyes. Jimmy got the bright idea, let's time this, and it always seemed to be about 8-10 seconds. The light would go out, and the craft would move it like a hummingbird darting. It wouldn't just glide over to the next area, it would shoot over sometime, and then just abruptly stop. A beam of light would come down again, stay there for 8 to 10 seconds, light out, and each time we'd say, wow, did you ever see a light like that? It was like a laser beam light, so bright. It fascinated our eyes. Our hearts were pounding. We were so excited. All we could say to each other is, imagine we're watching something that's probably not of this earth, an alien craft flying over here. As time went on, we watched this for about a good hour, and it kept going back. And we made sketches of the directions it would go back and forth and in and out, and then finally over Fruit Mine before it departed for the night. Later on, when I got on salary, I talked to Inco engineers about the vein of metals that we have out leading from Fruit Mine, and they said, yes, what you're telling us now, it corresponds with some of the veins of nickel that are under the New Sudbury area, and that we're actually mining under that area, and pockets of nickel are running in different directions of different grades, high grades, low grades, and that probably this beam of light was not looking down at houses, but probably picking up information of underground magnetic forces from the nickel and copper. We don't know, but the alien life must be studying our planet, our waterways, our mineral resources and everything, and we can only think that why would a UFO or this craft move back and forth and up and down in the form of a cross, north to south, east to west for a whole hour, not playing a game, and picking up and putting this light down, and probably picking up some kind of stuff that what we would do with a helicopter with the so-called bomb. Inco did a lot of research by dragging this magnetic bomb around and mapping our whole area. We know where all our nickel veins are. I feel that this craft, just a little more advanced, was probably doing one of the same things. It knows the makeup and structure of our Earth and has been studying our planet. So we found that very interesting. We tossed these ideas back and forth as we're watching this. I wonder what they're up to. And we felt at the time that this is probably what they're doing. They're studying our planet, and we found it interesting, and I'm sure the UFO people were finding it interesting too. I often wonder were they aware we were sitting on that hill that night. I really feel they knew we were there. Other times when I was involved, my friend Jimmy Tomasini and I, and we were staying out after 4 to 12 in my backyard at 132 excuse me. Been away from there already 16 years. It's 132 Ethelbert. We used to go up my backyard, and this particular night a UFO was flying. We knew it was a UFO. I had focused in with 600 power, and we could see the portholes. We could see the dome on the top. It was 1:30, 2 a.m., somewhere around there. It always seemed to be a couple hours after midnight that these things would appear. It was flying over the Frood Road area. First we focused in with 8x35 binoculars, both hanging around our neck, and then I took my telescope out, which was already on its legs and everything, and brought it out, and we focused right in, and we could look right in the porthole windows, and we could see beings, we'll call them aliens, that were walking around. They were not sitting, they were standing. It looked like a control panel Through the portholes we could see that the craft was brightly lit, and I could focus in, and there was one person who had a different suit on than the rest. It seemed there was 3-4 that we could see that were moving about, had silver-colored suits on, and this one, I would call him the leader, he had a black suit on. He was dressed different than the rest. So he must have had some significance that he was dressed different than the rest. And we were both smokers at the time, and I remember my friend Jimmy was almost eating his cigarette when he was looking at that. He said, all he could say was, oh my God, look at that, look at that. And before the evening was over, we folded the telescope up, and we jumped in my car, and we scooted down in this general direction. We just didn't stay in our backyard. I was keeping my wife awake, screen windows open. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and she even yelled out the window, I wish you two would go away and watch the UFOs someplace else in the district besides right directly under her bedroom window in the backyard, which I found funny, but she didn't think it was very funny. And by the time we got down to the Fruit Road area and everything, it was still there, but it was starting to drift away on us, It was there, but we were all ready to get set up, and then it decided, I guess it's seen our headlights come, maybe it's keeping an eye on us, and it was gone. So that ended that night. That was our big excitement for the night. Okay, another time, which we have the story on tape, when I got interviewed by CHNO on Elm Street because of the cutoff of the picture from about 12:30 to 1:30 over the CKSO Super Tower, and I was interviewed by CHNO, and I dominated 8 minutes of the 15-minute newscast that morning. Not FBI, but the Royal Canadian Mounted Police got a hold of it, and other people got a hold of it, including our Air Force base out here, and I was invited out by phone by a captain when I have time to come out when I'm on the right shift and tell him who I am at the gate, and invited me in. This didn't take too long, all within the same week of me getting on the radio. So I get out there, and I get shown through the gate by a sergeant, and I get in, and there's a nice-looking man, about 45 years old, captain, and he invites me to sit down, and I sit down at the desk, and I relate some of the things I've been doing and following up with UFO stories and things, and staying out in the middle of the night. And he says, you believe in UFOs? And I said, oh, by all means. I said, I've seen enough. And he says, well, we do too. He says, denied generally by the press and by the government. He says, we're told to do this. He says, because of public panic. He says, that's as far as I can tell you. And he says, we know they're there. We've been tracking them with radar for many years. And he says, we don't know where they're from any more than you do. He said, that's about all I can tell you at this point in time. He says, it's too bad you're just a civilian. I didn't know what he was getting at the time, but he reached into his desk drawer and took out a beautiful picture. It was a blown up 35 millimeter picture. It looked like about 7 by 9. Nice picture. And he said, you know what these are? And this was an aerial view. And I said, well, it looks like 3 discs. I could see that they were silver and that they had these glazed, sort of a colored center button part, looking down on them. He said, well, we had 3 jets that were coming in for a landing from about 5 miles high at North Bay just a couple of weeks ago, a week or 2 ago. I don't know exactly when now, because this is a few years back. And he says they reported down to base that as they were coming in, here was these 3 UFOs sitting right over the North Bay base. And this isn't the first time. They seemed to have an interest in it. He says, so one of them turned on his nose camera and took movies, and this is one of the better shots from a long string of frames. And here was a beautiful picture of 3 UFOs, and he says, this, I can't elaborate or go and tell you too much. He said, except this is a picture just taken a couple of weeks ago of 3 UFOs over our base, looking down at our Air Force base, and he says the Americans have set up a system there that we had missiles for the defense of Canada. They were American armed, Canadian manned. A lot of people don't know that, but we had a missile base down at the North Bay base. This wasn't real public knowledge for quite a few years, except when it come to the point where it was going to be closed down. NORAD, safety defense system, and then they were going to dismantle. But we had a base in North Bay that would actually open up and fire rockets out. This was a part of our defense against Russia. And that's why the UFOs, I imagine, were interested in flying over this base and studying the setup there, as they would be on any earthbound type of thing. So this is another experience I've had in my life, talking to a real captain, seeing a real picture pulled out from a drawer and saying, this is not public knowledge, but it's Air Force knowledge that UFOs do exist. We've been tracking them since 43, 44. Right after the first atomic bomb experiment went off in the world, UFO activity picked up. He did tell me that much, Up till that time, UFOs didn't seem to be around too much, except pilots did mention them when they were going over Germany bombing near the end part of the war. They say these strange silver discs, and the Germans would see them thinking they were ours, and we would see them thinking that they were theirs. And he did tell me that. He did elaborate that Air Force people, and they were told by the government at that time, well, it's okay to talk about this yourselves, but not to the general public. Not to say after the war was over that you've seen silver discs flying with no wings and no vapor trail or anything. So this was all kind of hush-hush. This is the night that Jimmy Tomasini and myself, we were heading out after 4 to 12 after having a hamburger and a pop. And I guess it was about 1:15, and we got parked down at the far end of Maley Drive, and we were ready for our little excursion into the bush. Got the telescope boat over our shoulder, and the legs and the weights, binoculars around our neck, and all set to go for another night. We were just getting off the roadway, just through the little shallow ditch. I had to do a little jumping there because of the reeds and a little bit of water, although it was a fairly dry summer. And along comes a cop, provincial police cop, not a Sudbury police, but a provincial police cop, come down here. Now, whether he was going on to duty or cutting over to the Falconbridge Highway, which that's their jurisdiction, and was using that, he pulled over and said, what are you boys doing here? I guess we looked pretty suspicious with all this equipment, and walking through, getting ready to climb up the hill, and then we start telling him, well, do you believe in UFOs? This is my personal remark to him right off the bat, and he says, why do you use? And I says, oh yes, we've had a lot of sightings, and we're going out, and I said, I've got involved with the Air Force at this time, they know who I am, and I'm Don Campbell, and this is my friend Jimmy, and okay, so that's all right. And I said, I bowl with Sergeant Lightfoot and also Sergeant Jim Colton of the Sudbury Police, and Sergeant Lightfoot. And he says, oh, Lightfoot, he says, he's not one of my bosses, but I know him well. He's down in our headquarters office. So this eased his mind about who I was and who I was talking about. And I even mentioned his wife's name, Audrey, and that he said, yes, I know her too, personally, so he knew I wasn't bullying him, that I knew these people. And put him at ease, and I said, we're going out tonight hoping that we're going to see some UFOs. And he said, well, talked to us for a few more minutes, and he lit up a cigarette, smoked outside his cruiser, and then said, oh, good luck, good UFO hunting, and, sort of jokingly, like, much as say, well, you might see one or you might not, but he wasn't really convinced, even though he said, yes, we've had cruisers, he says, phone in from Whitby area and different areas, he says, patrolling at night, and they've seen strange lights zooming down over the highway. He admitted this. He said, yes, some of our boys, I personally, says, I've never seen any. So anyway, a little bit of idle chit-chat, and we were on our way. And it wasn't a fruitless night, because it was shortly after 2. The famous 2 o'clock seemed to be the UFO time, when all us humans should be in bed, sleeping, and most of the lights out. And so we're up on a hill, and we're sitting up the telescope. It's just aimed up at the sky, not looking at any particular thing. And Jimmy's having a smoke, and at that particular time I had quit smoking. That was my first year of getting off the weed. I felt like one, but I wasn't. He was puffing away, and we seen 2 little stars in the sky quite high. And we looked again and said, geez, those aren't stars. And they were both coming down side by side. We don't know how far apart they were, until I'd say they were maybe 4 or 5 miles high, and we realized what we were looking at was 2 nice little white objects, which we believe had to be UFOs. So we weren't going to aim the telescope up at that moment. Too awkward, your sighting scope and everything. Binoculars up, both focused in. We said, by geez, we've got visitors. We're in luck tonight. And no sooner said than done. The one on the right-hand side, down, 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 from a white star. Then he turned on his blinking red light. Now, why they turn on the red light as they get lower, it's just like a warning to other craft, We're here. Don't bump into us. Up to that time, it was just the white star, just like a star, and his red blinking light, pumps like an aircraft would. He come down, down, down. First thing we know is Jimmy says, geez, he's right over the line. And the red light out, and then it took on a beautiful white glow, an actual, just like a halo, and traveling very, very slowly down the line, just very, very, very slowly. And Jimmy says, oh, He said, it's got to be sucking up power. Because from this hill view, we could look over at any remaining street lights, lights in people's windows, anything. We could look over toward New Sudbury in general. And we said, look at this. The street lights, they didn't go out. They dimmed, they dimmed, they dimmed. House lights, dim, 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 dim. And we watch this. We're looking at the lights. We're looking at the UFO. And it's going down the line, down the line. Then it seemed to stop and then come back up toward us. It wasn't going away any longer. As far as we were concerned, it had stopped and reversed itself and was coming back up. All this time, it wasn't telescope work. It was just focusing in, and it was definitely a round object. You could see the actual shape of the craft glowing over the wire. And 20, 25 minutes, maybe a half hour passed. I don't know exactly, although I did write it in my little notepad how long it was from the time we seen it. And then when it seemed to be fully satisfied with the power, the other one was sitting parked up there, like I said, about 5 miles high, still remaining white, and it went up, parked beside it, maybe 300, maybe 500 feet. Hard to judge distance when two things are, and it went up to about the same elevation, and the other one came down where it left off, and I guess it was charging up its system, and it did the same thing. But the exciting thing about the second one was, as it went down the line, all the lights went right out. All the lights in New Sudbury went out, all the street lights went out. This one was apparently drawing a heavier load. That's what excited me more than anything else, was the lights didn't dim. They just dimmed right till it just sucked all the power right out. So to make a long story short, we watched this for almost the same length of time, and it went up to join its other one. Both turned on their pulsating red lights, and then up, 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 and then the red lights off, and then two little stars in the sky, and they were gone. Now by this time we're just so excited, we're just elated. We jump in the car, we drive down, we rattle the old chains at the Hydro Exchange on the Garrison Road. Hydro Man comes out. There's a little buzzer you can ring for gate entry. Of course it says no lurking around, you're not supposed to be around there. And out comes this guy, and I don't think I told you this before, but the guy that was on duty that night was my namesake. He was another Don Campbell. I don't mind repeating his name. I went to school with him. It was another Don Campbell, same age as me, 3 months difference in our birthday, and he was Don Campbell, the second, Ontario Hydro, okay? He was the same name as me. This is no lie. This all comes out later on anyway. So anyway, he said, I'm not allowed to let you guys in, but he says, you can talk through the gate. And we said, well, I said, I've been watching UFOs for quite a while out here. And Jimmy and I, we talked idly back and forth. And he says, like I said, I'd like to let you in, but you've got to, I can't let you into a Hydro Exchange building. That's why the fence is there and the lock's on the door. And he says, I got quite scared the other night, and he said, I got scared again tonight. He says, that one almost came up to my back door when we told him that we were watching the UFO. He says, yes. He says, this isn't the first time. We're supposed to keep our mouth shut about it. He says, it's pretty scary. He says, when you have one come up. And he said, you're looking at your gauges, and you're dropping from 100,000 to 30,000. You're just losing all your power. And then you go out the back, and he said, you look up the line, and here's this glowing object coming down. And he said, this was the second time this week that we'd missed the first time. He said, this is the second time this week that we got paid visitors. So we didn't know that it had come right up to the back of the fence. He says, right close to the station. He says, so close that it frightened me. And he said, I went back in and closed the door. I didn't want to look at it. He said it was going to pick him up. He says, then he said, when my power came back up to 100,000, he says, well, the bugger's gone. He said, no sooner said than done. He says, down goes my power, 100,000, 70,000, 50,000, 30,000, and dropping. He said, I didn't have 1,000 volts left in the line. That's when all what we'd witnessed. We said, that's when we seen all the lights go out. He said, oh yeah, 15 minutes at least, he says, we lost total power. He said, it's all on the graph paper, the reading. He said, that thing was just sucking everything that was coming through that line. He said, this line feeds a big majority of New Sudbury, different parts of Sudbury, downtown and everything. He says he'd have to look at his map to see, what the junction, where that particular line. So he said, I come back out, and sure enough, he says, and there you are. He says, oh boy. He says, of course, all this is written down in my report, and I report to the hydro inspectors and also to Hennessy, who was the head Ontario man. So we had our little chat and everything, and I phoned in my report from a phone booth later. It was 10 cents for phones then, not a quarter. Into my 969 number, told them what I had witnessed, told them who I talked to, told them the whole story. And I guess they maybe were taking me at the other end, because every time I phoned, they were supposed to get, so they can pass it on to the day shift. Told them about. They said, well, we seen the UFOs parked. We seen one disappear out of the sky. It's below our radar line, and then we seen it come back up, like you said at that time, and we seen the other one disappear, and then it was below our radar line, and then the two together. Yes, that all coincides with exactly what you were saying. And then they both left together, and again, 15, 20,000 miles an hour as they sped away, all charged up. So they seem to depend on our hydro line power for charging up these smaller, they're little 30, 40, 50-foot craft. They seem to just borrow our power for a little while and drain some of our power, which is, to me, is highly interesting, because if they're from outer space, another planet, and they got a mothership that's, say, 1,000 miles high or 20,000 miles parked out there, they don't go back to their mothership to take power. Why should they bother? All kinds of hydro juice down here, they just draw it. Whether they hook a cable onto our line from the belly of their craft, or it's just an induction when they're so close that they're scientific. I feel that they're not touching. Of course, my eyes and binoculars don't tell the story. I don't know if there's something really, actually visibly touching, or they're just so close, but the craft glows. It actually gets a halo and a glow. It's something to see. Like through binoculars or with your eye, the whole craft is just a glowing ball. And then when they fly away from the line, they go back to a lighter color. It's amazing. It really is amazing. To see this, you no longer have any doubt in your mind. You are watching somebody from another world that may be 20, 30,000 years ahead of us in science. We can't fly an airplane down over a hydro line and suck the juice out of it and hover over like a helicopter and move slowly. Okay, in 1968, my friend Eric Westroth, who lives on Sunnyside Road at the very end, on the right-hand side, practically a private drive off of the paved road, had been my friend at that time up 15 years, and talked about a UFO sighting. We all talked about UFO sightings at work, because then they knew what I was doing about UFOs. He said, Don, I've had 1 or 2 sightings in the last week over Long Lake. I says, you're kidding. He says, no, 10:30, 11:15 in the evening. He says, I'm off a day shift and I'm home. I thought one night it was an airplane landing, he said. I'd come out and I'd look, and this red light is just hovering. And I says, you're kidding. And he says, no. He said, in fact, this particular thing, I didn't see this. He said the water was rippling beneath the UFO. The light was shining off the UFO, and the water was being agitated right below it. And he said, I knew it wasn't a plane. And the red pulsating light was pulsating. He said, and then it moved on, and down it went. He said, I just watched in awe. So this particular night, he says, we're at work. He says, this is what I seen, Don. He said, this was an afternoon week that we were talking about this. So the following week on day shift, he phones me. So he's going to come out and buy some fish tonight. And my son was interested. He had his 4th aquarium, starting with a 10-gallon, then a 25, then a 50, and then a 100. And he had bought many, many fish from Eric Westroth over the time, from Egyptian mouth breathers, silver fish, everything but the elaborate $100 fish. And Eric's whole basement was covered in fish, which they aren't anymore today. He's gone out of that business. And so we went out to his house this night, and I forget what it was, 2 cute little neons, I think that's what they're called, 50 cents each. Kenny bought a couple that night, and Eric put them in the bag, and as usual, very nice to me and his wife. He said, come on upstairs and we'll have some German buns my wife just baked, or cookies, and pop for the kids, and coffee. And we sat in their living room, dining room, which he had just newly renovated at the time. He had a beautiful picture window overlooking the lake. There was no buildings blocking his view, although he didn't have a lakeshore property. He was about 500-600 feet from the lake and could see quite clearly. And as we're enjoying our coffee and the kids are playing and talking, and he says, there's one right now. And I couldn't believe. We're looking out, and here's a red light looking right out the picture window. A red light so slow that it can't be a plane coming in for a landing. It can't be one taking off, because as he said, if an airplane is taking off for landing, they would have to have radar at this time of night, which they don't, private little planes, and you would hear the roar. And being a summer night, windows are all open, screens are open. We all run out into the yard, and sure enough, here's this blink red light like a pulsating heartbeat. And he says, that's just like I seen before. He says, except this time it's not hovering. It was just going about 10-15 miles an hour. And right away, Kenny, my son, got the bright idea, Dad, let's race it to the far end. It's going right down the lake. And I said, goodbye, Eric. Good night. We took our fish. Excuse us. And he said, well, I don't blame you. And we fired up my car. It was a Ford at the time I owned. And down the lake we went until we caught up with it. It wasn't too long because it just passed. It was doing about 25 to 30 miles an hour. We were keeping a constant eye between the buildings, and we'd see the flash of red, and then a tree, and then the UFO, then we'd miss it, and it'd be a high building, we couldn't see it, then we'd just go in about an even 30, and then, oh, there it is. Kenny was looking out the left side, and I'm watching over too. I'm jiggling all over the road. I think I might go off the road because I'm looking over at the lake and looking at the road and keeping up with it. And the dad says, Kenny said, Dad, speed up a little bit and maybe we'll beat it to the corner where the road 90 degree, where you come out to the end, turn into Sudbury or on the other side of Long Lake. And I said, okay. So we speeded up to about 45, 50, got ahead, stopped the car, put the emergency on, left the motor running, headlights on, and we just got out of the car, and Kenny says, there it's coming, Dad. And sure enough, 800, maybe 1,000 feet, we're standing right at the edge of the lake shore and where the road joins, and there's a tunnel bridge with a big galvanized, still is there today, just a flow through for the water. It dumps into a creek and goes down into a lake where the lands and forests park their planes. At the end of Long Lake, there's another little lake at the bottom, they park them there. That's where they take off from to water bomb. I just forget the name of this lake, but if you look on a map, there's Long Lake and this other lake. So anyway, we're there, and it's coming, and it comes right over the top of the car, no more than 50 feet high. The hair on my arms stood right up. It's just like static electricity, like a magnet. I could feel it tingling in the back of my neck. And my son, who had a very short haircut, he says, oh my God, he could feel the hair jiggling on the back. He says, what a feeling, We were both amazed with this because it's so close. The lights in my car went down to a dim yellow for about 3-4 seconds, and my motor stumbled. I thought it was just going to cut it right off. I had read times before where cars' electricity was just drained and they stopped. In this case, I won't lie about it, it didn't. The motor just V8, it just jiggled a bit, just like it was going to stop, but the UFO going at the speed, had it hovered over the car, I imagine it would have. But it just passed over, lights dim, motor went, and then it smoothed out. And Kenny said, did you see that? And I said, I sure did. And that's all we talked about until we got home. Alice said, oh, you're coming home late. By this time it's about 10 to 11. I said, that's okay. Kenny's got no school tomorrow. Usually we had him to bed before 11. Even in the summer, 10 o'clock usually he was. So he put his new fish in the tank, and we talked about UFOs all that evening. In fact, I don't think I slept till 3 in the morning. My hands get all sweaty, and I was so excited when I went to bed, having a UFO pass within 50 feet over my head, coming right over my car. Now, I don't think too many people get anything closer than that. Any closer than that, then maybe my skin would have got burnt from the radiation coming off of it. It wasn't blowing out any fire or anything like that. But it definitely, whatever type of motor that has in it, or effect it has to keep its elevation, does make the hair feel electrical static on your arms, your hair, and you get this feeling. You can actually, it does something to your hair. And this was one of the most exciting nights, this recalling that, the super tower, the time the two were down over New Sudbury line sucking up power, one taking a turn and then the other. That was another exciting night, especially when they wrote in the paper the next day, vandals shoot insulators off hydro lines, causing power blackout of 1 hour, and it was 2 UFOs sucking the power out. And just a nice little notice in the paper on the second page, vandals go out and shoot off insulators and power line. Hydro has to go out in the middle of the night and repair power line to get power restored. And I said, sure. Talk to me about it. Again, one of the things that you're supposed to keep quiet about, and you talk to your friends about it. You talk to Hennebury from Ontario Hydro about it, and he admitted that yes, this is happening quite often. I'd talked to him the year before, and he said, we're not to divulge this to the general public. He said, we know about them. It's for 2 years now we've been plagued with power outages or power shortages. Long Lake, he says, been in that area, and the night you were watching that area, also at Windy Lake, which is up by Levac. One hovered too long. I've got to recall this while this tape is going. It hovered so long one night over one spot that it melted the lines for 300 feet. And they had to send out, this is the middle of the winter, they had to send out their toboggan skidoos, with the wide track and cables, and go out there and assess the damage. And the power was off at the Falconbridge's Facuna mine, Inco's Levac mine for the remainder of the night from 3 in the morning till 7. The men couldn't come up, change shifts at 7 in the morning because everybody had to stay down because electricity was totally cut off until Ontario Hydro got the lines repaired, which was 300 feet. They brought in samples. They weren't no longer than a foot long. This was all private. They were melted, and they turned them over to labs for testing. And of course, an eyewitness that was along the road that night said, this didn't happen by accident. He said, I seen the UFO over the road, hovering over there and sitting there and the glowing underneath the belly, and he said all of a sudden it just disappeared. And he said, he didn't think no more of it except that this thing had happened, but what had actually happened was the lines had melted. And of course this person only seen the UFO and then he seen him dart away. He had no reason to think that anything was unusual except that he figured he seen a UFO. What I'm getting at is, he didn't say the lights all went out because there was no lights along the highway to see go out. He just knew that it was over a hydro line glowing, and then he left. And the reason he left was it had stayed there so long, it had pulling the power in at such a rapid rate, it had melted all this hydro lines out. When hydro went out to investigate, they found pieces in the snow, cooled down naturally. 200-300 feet of copper literally melted. Some was flat, some was spattered, where it just went into a dripping stage. So you can imagine the electromagnetic field as the UFO pulled its power through and actually melted the line and caused an outage at Facunis, which was owned by Falconbridge, and Levac, which is owned by Inco. And this went into official report, reason for power outage. The men that were on shift were paid overtime, couldn't get up out of the mine unless you wanted to climb 3,000 feet straight up. And nobody wants that kind of exercise, They waited for the elevator to be turned on. They had contact with the surface through their walkie-talkie network, which it's not prevalent on any other power but a battery power, just hooked to battery power backup system. And they said, what's wrong up there? And the elevator man apparently just said, we don't know, but a line must be down someplace. They didn't know anything about UFOs. You just can't come out from underground until we get power back. We phoned Hydro about it, and they're going to be out. So it happened about 3 in the morning, 3 a.m., and at 7 the next morning. This was reported in the paper, again, as vandalism, shooting at deer and popping at hydro line insulators as a hobby at 3 o'clock in the morning. Imagine hunters out at 3 o'clock in the morning popping off hydro insulators. This is what Hydro had to put in the paper to cover up again. Reported to the Sudbury Star the 2 mines that were down and the reason for the power blackout till they repaired it. And really, when I talked to Mr. Bigwig himself, Hennessy of Ontario Hydro, he said we had 300 feet of hydro line melted, but that's not to get out into the public. But that was the reason. This is why this hydro thing was the way it was. That's another one of the interesting things that happened in my time, 67, 68. These were the things that were going on in Sudbury. Quite interesting. When I built, this is the story of all. It involves my wife Alice Campbell. In 1976, we had bought a lot in March from Arnell Michel from Moonglow subdivision. And so I started my house. I subcontracted this home that I'm now living in. It's 1992 now. And so Alice and I, my frame is up, our windows are in, and we've had about 10 loads of gravel shoved into the garage hole. All around the basement level, the bulldozer could only do so much. And my wife and I were working on a day-by-day basis. She had worked 17 years at Burke's downtown, and from 75 to 78 she took 3 years off, and she wasn't working. This particular day I was on afternoon shift. I had sold my house at 132 Ethelbert, and had all my money in the bank involved with building my new house here at 488 Telstar. And anyway, this day we ate dinner at my mom's house, and we're coming up the hill on Telstar here, Moonglow subdivision, and we make I'm slow up at the corner as I always do from Regent. There was no lights at the time as there is now, and I'm turning up the hill, and I must stress that there was only Jerry Lorraine. His house was across the street. He had stored some lumber in his garage for my house because my contractors were taking the lumber out of his garage framing. We didn't leave it out in piles at night. He gave me permission. And a high school principal of the Catholic school just over in Jupiter Court here was the second house, and I was the third. So it was a very lonely subdivision. So as we turned up the hill, I almost come to a complete stop. Here's this white, beautiful coupe with no markings, no names on the front the hubcaps, anything on the side to signify what type of a car it is. And behind the wheel was this, as far as I'm concerned, a UFO person, big eyes, no pupils, big round oval eyes, a small little nose, just two little slits, and a slit for a mouth, no visible earlobes, and a wig. You could sure tell it was a wig on a dome head. It just sat on the top, and you could just see that it could slide any place. And she or he looked over at us as we were turning the corner to come up into the subdivision. She was going down. And I said to my wife as I poked her in the ribs, "Look at a real UFO person." She said, "Oh my God, it is." And I almost stopped, and they were stopped because they had to come out onto Regent Street. I shouldn't say they, just there was the one person in the car, and it had white gloves on covering their fingers, so we could not see the fingers up in the steering wheel. So I looked at this, and I proceeded about 5 miles an hour, turning my head as I'm coming up, and then my wife and the head of this alien person, which I say is an alien person, turned its head around like a robin or a bird or an owl, because it swiveled its head more than a human could swing. And my wife said, she screamed, my wife screamed, and she said, "Oh my God." And I said, "What are you screaming about?" She says, "It said to her, 'I want to talk to you.'" And I said, "It didn't say nothing." And apparently it beamed this message right through mental telepathy from the person to my wife, which frightened her. She just didn't understand hearing a voice in her head, even though my window was down. The mouth didn't move on this. So I proceeded up the hill, 300 feet up the hill, over the crest, 8 lots down, right-hand side. We stopped. Just before I stopped, I glanced in my rearview mirror, and I said, "Guess what, Alice? She or he has turned around the bottom of the hill and is following us up." I got out of the car on my side. She got out on the house side. My house is on the right-hand side. I walked around to her, and I said, "If it goes by, let's jump back in the car and follow it." At this point in time, the car was coming very slowly and looking right at us with these eyes, which was really something. It just, it just sent a feeling right through you. These huge eyes, no white pupils, nothing. Just almost a glazy brown-black. And it just seemed so strange to see a person with eyes like this. No eyebrows, no eyelashes, nothing. And a sort of an elephant-looking type of grayish cast skin. It was sort of a whitish gray, And this is what fascinated us, what we could see, and the white-gloved hands. So I said, I always have a pencil and paper in my pocket because we were taking measurements down, ordering lumber, doing this and that. Each day I had a regimen to follow. So I'm quite excited. My heart's pounding. My wife, as the car slows down, it looks like it's going to stop to talk to us. And my wife says, "Catch me, I'm passing out." And I had to put my hands under her arms from the back. And she literally just took a breath and sort of semi-collapsed. And I pulled her up and I says, "Come on, Alice." I says, "Never mind, And this car is just passing 10 feet away, just on the side of my car where I'm stopped. And I have the smartness as it's passing. I said, I've got to write this number, FLA 600 down. So I write it down. It looks like an Ontario plate. Everything's in order. 6 numbers, 3 letters, 3 numbers. I don't know why I'm taking this number down. And again, I check the back. It doesn't say Mercedes. It doesn't say anything. A trunk. No writing. There's no cars made in Canada States that doesn't say its name on it someplace. It just doesn't exist. Every car has a nameplate. The car had normal looking tires like anything. It wasn't floating on the road. Although the one thing that I did think was very funny is I couldn't hear any motor sound. Even though it was going slow, you always seem to hear a motor sound of cylinders or anything. You got good hearing. There didn't seem to be no motor sound as we know a motor sound coming out of the exhaust. So anyway, after jotting these numbers down, I said to my wife, I'm going to follow it down. It's called Skyway now. The name hadn't even been put on the street. Skyway, down on Darnell Street. And she says, it's going to abduct you. It might hypnotize you. It's going to take you away. She says, for God's sake, Donnie, please don't go. So I made up my mind at that time. My wife had such a frightening... I said, oh no, I won't follow it. I won't go. The thing about this car is that it had a neary glow to it. It had a white paint, but it had a look that was hard to describe. Like it just seemed to have a glow, an aura about it, as it passed. So as far as I'm concerned, it certainly wasn't of this world. Now, I think I'm very fortunate for after this incident happened, we did our bit of work, and then I left at 2:30 to go home to shave up and clean up because as a foreman I had to be in at 3. My wife says Jerry Larray or somebody else will either take me home or I'll use his phone at 6 o'clock. And my mother had a little 62 Envoy. She ended up calling my mother at supper time, and this is how she got a ride home. She continued to work. We were trying to save money on our house. So make a long story short, she got picked up by Mom, I guess, by 5:30 and got home. The next day I phoned, this particular day, I phoned the station, told them who I was, a provincial police station, by the way. I bowled for 10 years in the Friendship League with Sergeant Colton of the Sudbury Police Force and Sergeant Lightfoot of the Provincial Police Force. They're two couples, and my wife and I made a team of 6, mixed league, Friendship League, and we'd already been with them, I guess it was about the 7th year. So when I phoned the Provincial Police Station, I just said, I'm a very good friend of Sergeant Lightfoot, could I speak to him? They said, he's not in right now, but this is Sergeant, whatever his name was at the time, I just don't quite recall. He says, well, what's it about? And the reason I mentioned Sergeant Lightfoot is I figured, well, I got to get in here good because I've had a strange thing happen to me, but I'm not going to mention UFOs to him. I said, I made up a story. I lied. I said, I just passed a car. It almost run me off the road on Regent Street. This is what I said to this guy. I said, he must have been drunk. I said, his license number is FLA 600. I wrote it down. I said, and this person should be checked into and just see who they are, where their license registration is, knowing darn well that in my mind there is no registration. He says, where can I reach you at? And I says 671-3811 was my mother's phone number at the time, and up in the West End. And he says, how long are you going to be there? And I says, for about 15 more minutes before I go to work. So he said, we usually don't do this for anybody. He says, seeing that you're a friend of Sergeant Lightfoot's, who is a true friend of mine, I figured we'd been bowling with him for many years, and we talked about things like this. So anyway, he got back to me about 5-10 minutes just before I was ready to go to work, and said, Mr. Campbell? I said, yeah. He got me on the phone. He says, this car you reported, white, looked like a Mercedes-Benz coupe, white, and no markings on it with this license number. We run it through the computers, and there's no such number in Ontario. There's no such number in Canada. You must have taken the number down wrong. So in my mind, all this proved once and for all is we had an alien car with an alien person with a phony license plate on that didn't belong to this earth. They made up their own license plate and put their own number on. It didn't exist. The number was non-existent at the time. And I just thought to myself, well, I said I must have made a mistake and left it at that. But I couldn't wait till the following week when I could tell Sergeant Lightfoot of my experience. And he told me of quite a few experiences when we used to talk at the bowling alley between doing our lines. He'd say, oh yes, he says, we have cruisers out in Graveyard. He says, we've had cruisers, he says, even chase UFOs down the road out of their territory, beyond where they're supposed to go from point A to B, our provincial police station. He says, we get written reports up about these things all the time. Flying white, red lights, glowing in the sky, flying just above the cruiser, traveling at the same speed as the cruiser or slightly ahead, and the cruiser going down the highway, and the cruiser would speed up to 80, and the UFO would speed up to 80, and the cruiser would slow down to 50 or 60. He says, yeah. He says, we have these incidents all the time. He says, they go in our private files. He says, but we've had all kinds of reports. So I would talk quite openly to him, and I say, do you believe in UFOs? And he says, oh, by all means. He says, our constables aren't crazy. He says, they know what they're seeing. He says the Sudbury Police has got the same experience as people that work on Graveyard in cruisers and walking the beat in the middle of the night have looked up and seen these things. And in 67 and 68, believe me, the Sudbury Star had many, many little articles. Postal worker in Valcairn sees UFO at 6 o'clock in the morning, gets scared. UFO seen over post office, in early hours of morning in Sudbury, Ontario. 5 jets screamed down from Flint, Michigan, and watch 5 are coming in because all the Sudbury police and the provincial police are up on Burton Avenue, where the old city dump was, watching UFOs putting on an exhibit from 1:30 to 2:30 in the morning for an hour, enough time for 5 jets. This was the headlines in the good old Sudbury Star. No denying it. It said that I can still see the title. Jets scramble from Flint, Michigan down to Sudbury, Ontario, and when they're 20 miles away, the 5 UFOs promptly put out their lights and flew away and scrambled. This is all quite interesting. So these are some of the things that have happened in my time, and I followed through. Okay, my final consensus in all these stories that I've related to my friend this afternoon is that the government has been covering up stories like this and many all across the United States and Canada and Brazil and Argentina for many years. They claim that it'll be mass hysteria. I really don't feel that way. I feel that UFO people have met with the governments of our great countries and discussed conditions with them and everything, and I feel that they don't want their good jobs in their government to go. A higher system of intelligence could come down here and lead our people, probably end our wars that we're having right now and everything. And I really personally feel, this is my own feelings, that our government doesn't want that. They've got too cushy of jobs and positions. So they say, we'll keep it from the people. Anybody that sees them, they're nuts. They've been drinking too much booze. This has been the cover-up for years, but as we all know, papers, magazines, doctors, lawyers, accountants from all walks of life have seen many, many UFOs. Pictures have been taken, daylight pictures, night pictures. Anybody knows anybody in the Air Force. They've been spotted on radar at 15, 20 sightings a day. UFOs going at 22 and 30,000 miles an hour and turning 90-degree corners, which is impossible for our craft. It can no longer be denied. I think it's just a matter of time before it's going to leak out, and I really don't know how the government is going to explain to the people that since the early 40s they've been lying and lying all this time, but I guess they'll have a good one made up when the time does come. That's it.